Welcome back to Media That Made Us. I'm your host, Scott Paladin, and we are joined this week by Doc Holland to talk about the X-Men. So, join us, won't you?
My cat Rogue, who was very sweet, but also kind of that flying brick superpower a little bit sometimes.
All right. Well, I guess we'll just roll on into it.
Sure.
If someone was to ask the question, who is Holland? What do you hope the answer is?
Well, your friendly neighborhood livestock nerd who's also, I'm quote Anna, I'm very good at stats for a biologist, I think.
Yeah.
Good at stats for a biologist, but, I'm a nerd who just kept winding up getting nerdier as I got older, and I think that's awesome. I get excited about things, and I answer questions for people with science.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you don't mind asking, what kind of kid were you?
Oh gosh, I was like the stereotypical nerd kid. I was reading from a very early age. I used to get permission to actually go to the upper level classrooms and borrow books from their bookcases.
Nice.
So my parents were pretty much, if you're able to read it, go ahead and read it. If you don't know a word, you'll look it up in the dictionary or ask us. So I remember being like first grade and getting permission to read Goosebumps books.
Gotcha.
Or getting them from the, I was just very much the stereotypical nerdy kid, but also the very always getting into stuff, not terribly coordinated in some ways, but just very... I was also the kid who would not stop asking questions until my teachers realized if they let me read Stephen King novels in class, that would stop some of the off-topic questions. But I got a birthday card from my mom when I turned 30 when she was like, as a little kid, you were always asking questions. And now as an adult, you're doing that, but you're doing that because that's your job as a scientist.
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, I wanted to be a Jedi when I grew up. When I realized that wasn't a career option, I was bummed. Stereotypical 90s nerd kid. I guess. And growing up originally in South Florida, that's a really good place to grow up if you're like a kind of outdoorsy nerd kid who's just obsessed with critters.
Yeah. Wildlife all over down there.
Exactly. When we moved to Iowa, less opportunities there. But especially as a kid, I remember, there were all sorts of science museums around. There were all sorts of wildlife places. The amount of things you could just see in the backyard.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think that was really... And then Pokemon came out, which is, the gateway drug for future biologists. So... I
believe it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I joke that I kind of had no choice but to be a nerd. If you look at my family, there's so many... I'm the odd one out who'd rather work with critters than people. I've got more human medical. I've got lots of engineers in my family. But yeah, stereotypical nerd. The gay thing, less stereotypical, but really I was so obsessed with Xena as a kid that should not have been a surprise to my parents. Because I didn't play Barbies. I played Xena, Warrior, Princess, Amazon fighting each other with tinfoil armor kind of thing. Yeah,
something I did not understand as a child was how often the Barbies that my friends were playing with were having action adventures as opposed to shopping adventures. If anything, the Barbies got up to way more dark shit than even the G.I. Joes did.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I had Game of Thrones intrigues and stuff with my Barbies, and except for one of my Barbies though. I was also big into gargoyles and stuff.
Oh yeah.
I remember I got the Pocahontas Barbie, but I was like, no, she's Detective Elisa Maza, and
that's fantastic.
I think I took Baywatch Barbie's jacket or whatever. I was the 90s were a really good age for nerdy TV for kids.
Yeah, they really were. Yeah. Well, that being said, I don't know how they compare to some of the later stuff because I was out of it by then. So maybe it's entirely possible that the 2000s, 2010s were good too. I just didn't know about them, but there were definitely really good ones in the 90s.
There were some good ones in the early 2000s. So I just got, I'm about 2 months into a new job, and the hiring push was called Impossible Without You. And I think that's really cool. And they keep calling us the Impossible or whatever. I keep thinking of that cartoon, Kim Possible.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of the people in this cohort that have been hired are my age or, so mid 30s or so. And so all of us, when I make that joke, all of us pretty much get the reference, even though Australia, that cartoon did make it over this side of the pond.
Yeah.
But our supervisors have to have us like, have to explain like, you know, it's the cartoon about the cheerleader who was the secret agent, kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but different.
Yeah.
But, there were a lot of good ones.
I did not see a lot of that one, but the only way that Kim Possible, not the only way, I've watched some of it, but the predominant way that I have seen Kim Possible show up in the public consciousness is just gay people thirsting over Shago, who is apparently people's awakenings, which I totally get 100%.
My awakening was through X-Men, but yeah, she was definitely on the list of like media characters I crushed over at that age.
Oh yeah, no, I completely get that one. Yeah.
Yes, but also like it was kind of Buffy the Vampire Slayer-esque for like a younger set than Buffy per se.
That's a really good comparison. I hadn't made that connection before, but I 100% see that one as a sort of not a Buffy ripoff exactly, but within the same vein is maybe the way to put it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it
was like for a younger audiences for sure.
Yeah,
and I didn't get into Buffy until like high school.
Mm-hmm.
When I was kind of going through my gothish phase kind of thing, because just that age gap a little bit with like what's around.
Yeah. But you're definitely right about the 90s being a good time for nerdy, young children, because there was all kinds of good stuff in there. There was Gargoyles, of course, which is like legitimately ahead of its time in terms of like Saturday morning cartoon storytelling.
It still holds up so well. I'm so glad it's on Disney.
Yeah.
It's got such good rewatch value.
Yeah. Although skip the last season, the one that Greg Weisman wasn't involved in.
Yes. Early to mid 2000s Gargoyles fandom on the internet was also going strong.
Greg Weisman is the most fan-like creator I've ever come across. Like he would be a super fan on the forums, and he is, but he is also the creator of the things that he's talking about. It's really weird. It's great.
It's interesting too, because then when like the Bad Pod episodes talking about like JMS and all that Usenet stuff, and that was like a little before my time per se.
Yeah.
But it's kind of in a similar-ish vein. But I agree with you that Greg Weisman seems to be like universally beloved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he seems like a cool
the
dude.
stuff he's done is just so fun.
Yeah. And then if we're talking 90s cartoons, then that's the X-Men as well.
Yep. Though I actually got more into the X-Men Evolution cartoon first.
The X-Men Evolution cartoon, I didn't see it, but the art style whips. It's got that like early mid 2000s sort of simplified art style, which is really good, and their character designs are on point. They are very good.
Making Rogue Goth, I think, was a really good character choice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%.
Like, because the X-Men cartoon, as it was coming out again, that was like mid 90s, so I was a bit young for it. I remember having like some of the action figures. I like especially some of like the fast food tie-ins. I remember getting like a Storm action figure from like a fast food thing or whatever. But X-Men Evolution, like back when Saturday morning cartoons were a thing.
Yeah.
And like arguing with my siblings and stuff. I remember not only watching it, but then like towards the end of the run, I can date back the age I first started babysitting for pay, because I remember one of the season finales I had to tape because I was babysitting someone I was babysitting that morning.
Yeah.
So I had to make sure I had to tape it on the VCR so I wouldn't miss it, because that was like the season finale for the summer, and I didn't want to miss that episode. Things that sound completely incomprehensible to like a lot of younger people, but it was a thing.
Yeah. No, that was, I don't even, we had to, you had to like, and then you have to fast forward through the commercials, which were not skippable, and like, you have to like, and you'd always get like the end of a different show right before because it had to start a few minutes early, otherwise it would line up. So you get the last couple of minutes of some, tangentially related thing, Salute Your Shorts or something like that if it was on Nick. So was X-Men Evolution like your first X-Men property, or had you already encountered it
I was
somehow?
like I was kind of aware of it in like a broad sense, but the big introduction actually was watching the first X-Men movie on cable.
Okay.
And while I know I was aware of X-Men before that and everything like that, that was my big moment, because I remember watching it on cable, and I was like just watching TV, kind of, it was in the basement or whatever, and Rebecca Romaine comes on screen as Mystique, and that's when me, all of like 11 years old, has the big, oh, I'm not straight. Okay, I've learned something about myself today. I'm pretty sure my parents aren't going to be thrilled by this, so I'm not sure if I can really. I think I'm going to keep this to myself for a while. But yeah, wow.
Yeah, that was a hell of a character design.
Yes,
the X-Men movies, the Bryan Singer movies, were definitely a very. I mean, I don't remember when the first one came out, but it was definitely
2000, I think. Actually,
2000. Okay, but it has a very 90s. Because I guess the production was at the end of the 90s, but it has kind of a 90s aesthetic to it. But everything was a little bit darker and grungier and not quite so colorful. And yeah, the way they decided to make Mystique work was like, oh yeah, she's blue and she's naked all of the time, and you're like, and a whole generation of young boys and young gays were like, oh okay, hello.
Yes, like she's like, I was already kind of into the whole like supervillain kind of thing. Because honestly, Marvel does tend to queer code their supervillains, and they tend to make them the more interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but also like I remember, slightly off topic, but there's a book called Hench by Natalie Zena Walshots.
Okay.
Which is really good. It's about someone temping for supervillains, and then kind of thinking about collateral damage from superheroes and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But I think she's talked about being on like some certain supervillain fan sites, including for Doctor Doom, like in the LiveJournal days. And I think I might have been on similar ones because there were a lot of like LiveJournal like groups about like Marvel keeps making their supervillains really hot and more interesting and kind of queer coded. And that I think David Bowie and Labyrinth kind of primed a generation for some of that kind of like,
oh, sure,
being into that kind of thing. Yeah. And then like, again, Gargoyles, Fox on Gargoyles, and Demona.
Oh yeah, Demona
Fox. On Gargoyles.
Fucking Xanatos too even can get it.
Oh yes.
Like, yeah, no.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. There's a certain kind of I don't know. I think there might be something just like innate about a villain that like it's not necessarily that villainy itself is hot, but that the secondary characteristics that lend themselves to our villainy, confidence, a bit of danger, the freedom to not be like all of the things, the design characteristics you have to do when you create a protagonist, you don't have those. Mm-hmm. You have a lot more freedom to make them more outlandish. And then at least, especially on kids television, whoever's playing the villain is given a lot of freedom for performance to really kind of chew the scenery. And I think all of these things put together makes them prime fodder for people to have crushes on. Like it's really important,
Exactly. They get to have fun with it. They get to be campy.
Yes.
For someone who's always been like very socially awkward as a kid, like I was like slightly group viewing like regular people as slightly slightly anthropological study of like the typical average human kind of thing. Mm-hmm. My younger siblings are much more normal, kind of thing. But like the idea that, that confidence, that lack of awkwardness, that just like, I am here, I am owning myself. It's almost drag in a sense. Like there's that same performative aspect. And I'm a huge Drag Race nerd. I really got into that during the pandemic. The first time actually I saw another queer person in real life was when I was working a catering gig in high school. Yeah. And we were catering a charity benefit, and the entertainment was a drag performer. So like, but also, Dolly Parton, in a sense, does drag.
Oh, yeah,
like
100%.
There's that.
Yeah.
And I've got tickets to 2 different Drag Race shows, like, because now I'm in Brisbane where they get, like, international performances. I've got tickets to 2 different Drag Race shows, and They Might Be Giants.
Oh, cool.
On the next couple of months. But just that queerness and that campiness and that playing with gender, and also, but being very secure and confident in yourself, I think that speaks to a lot of people, especially nerds, especially queer nerds, especially people who are like, you grew up definitely feeling on the outside.
Oh yeah. Well, and like, it's interesting because the history of sort of queer coding villains, especially, is it's not new. It's been going back at least to the Hays Code, if not farther. But that's the
only way they could get away with it, really.
Yeah, where it's like literally like in an effort to still depict gay people and still use those kinds of characters, they're like, well, they can't be the protagonist because the censors say we can't, so we're going to make them the antagonist. And if anything, it just kind of works better that way, in all told. But it doesn't stop anybody. Sure.
And it allows that kind of inherent pathos, but then also, I feel like if you don't have a good set of protagonists or a good set of antagonists, the hero is kind of boring.
Oh yeah.
And
And
so that's that conflict definitely defines it.
And often, because the primary relationship of an action show, if your show isn't a romance, then the primary the primary relationship that exists is the antagonist versus the protagonist. Like, Kim versus Shago, going back to Kim Possible, has got so much more chemistry than whatever his name, Kim and Ron was.
Yeah.
I think, at least I
agree with you. I always thought Ron was just like the idea of like the boring dudes people are expected to find interesting. I'm like, no.
But so it's no wonder, and that's not just limited to that. I mean, it seems like almost every show has a really interesting relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist, because you have to have a lot of screen time. They have to care about each other, even though they kind of hate each other. But like, because they hate is a kind of like, it's not that like hate and love are two different sides of the same coin. They're the same side of the coin, really. Like,
the opposite of hate is indifference.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like, I mean, and thinking of like Gargoyles too, like, Xanatos and Goliath have a certain amount of chemistry there too. And like, there's
or Demona and Elisa, dang.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then as a straight white dude, I will admit I could be wrong about this, but I swear the Macbeth Demona relationship feels very queer. Like,
oh yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah,
because like, I mean, the thing is that, to be fair, there's a lot of overlap with Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I was into Gargoyles before I got into TNG, but the amount of chaotic disaster by energy on that show.
Yes.
Like, and that's the thing. It's like, my mom's a lawyer.
Yeah.
Who then later got into renovating houses. Dad's an engineer. Like, I'm a very organized person, but it's it's a way of like making my inherent chaotic disaster by energy workable.
Yeah.
And my now job is basically trying to capture the inherent messiness in biology in a way of predicting things, but it's also still, capture the fact that biology is messy and weird and strange and doesn't follow predictable rules is what I love about that. And like that kind of messiness, that's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
But the sheer amount of like energy like that they were channeling.
Oh yeah. Huge.
Like,
yeah. Like, what is it? Occasionally you come across that like a man and a woman dynamic where it's like they're together, they're married, maybe even, but it's definitely in the both of them are bi kind of way.
Exactly. Like Xanatos and Fox. I'm sorry, but there's like
I get that one too. Yeah.
There's a joke that Chris Claremont never really made a straight character. I would argue Greg Wiseman sometimes. Like, I think you could make the case for.
I think he's made a couple, but yeah, he has a much higher percentage than somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying that there's none. I'm just saying that, like, in terms of the dynamic.
Yeah.
It's just like Deep Space Nine, like compared to TNG, had a much higher.
Oh yeah.
Like, I'm a second generation Star Trek nerd.
Yeah.
My mom was a fan of. My mom was like. A bit young for the original release, but she watched it in like reruns and syndication and everything like that. And she's very much a fan of like TOS, especially a fan of Spock. She had a crush on him as a kid, which could taste their mom. But I watched Deep Space Nine. I'm like, oh my God, Bashir.
Yeah.
Like same vibes, bro.
Yeah.
Like very.
Yeah.
Like my mom would be like, oh, you're kind of like data. You're very interested in like information. I'm like, you're presuming a level of logic.
Yeah. Like, no, it's purely glandular, my interest. I get that.
Well, no, it's just more of a like, Bashir is like the, you don't get an example of nerds as much as I would have liked. The example of like the messy kind of nerd, the enthusiastic, like,
oh yeah.
Like just the throwing himself at everything.
Yeah. Like
brain has 2 speeds, full stop, full on and stop.
Yeah.
Or is what one of my colleagues on Twitter described as a border collie personality.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And that describes academics, especially.
Oh yeah.
Like a lot of.
Oh yeah.
Whether you're introverted or extroverted, in a general sense, that idea of a border collie personality as it applies to your work and what you do.
Yeah. Like.
I feel like that was captured better by Bashir.
Oh yeah. Oh well.
Until you get to like Discovery.
Sure.
Like that was the.
Well, like like if you're looking at sort of the progression of nerd representation in Star Trek, you start with like Spock, and then you move to Data, who are, I mean, as much as anybody on those shows aren't nerds, but like that they're sort of the point of view characters, and they really encompass the somebody who doesn't fit in with the rest of a social structure, looking out on the outside looking in. That's the dynamic they're really following. And when you get to Bashir, who I think is a reasonable continuation of that, it's much more the like ADHD, I am part of all of this, but like my brain doesn't work quite exactly the same way as everybody else's, and I am going a mile a minute, everything's messy and disaster. But he's like also at the same time, he is part of he's not like apart from the rest of the crew the same way everybody else is. He's a human. He's got his own differences, but they're not immediately apparent. It's a different dynamic, and it's really powerful in that way.
But at the same time, he still does, because even before the augment thing, which, you know, how that was handled, whatever, one of the reasons I think he and Garrick have that dynamic is that how Bashir presents himself as but inwardly you can tell that there's still a lot of that. I'm not sure how, you know, I still feel kind of like an outsider there. So, and as someone who's always felt like that, you know, for a lot of reasons, not just socially, I'm from a blended family. So like, but, you know, I didn't have, for completely logical reasons, I didn't have contact with one of those sides of the family. But, you know, then, you know, younger siblings, like, don't have all that messiness involved in everything.
Right.
There is kind of that, like, whole, I feel like I'm the odd one out the whole time.
Yeah.
You know, when you don't like terribly look like your siblings per se.
Yeah.
Or like there's just so much differences. But that's another reason that X-Men actually gives you a lot of that, because a lot of the drama comes back to family. You know, the Juggernaut and Charles Xavier are stepbrothers. You've got Mystique and Nightcrawler and Rogue, and now with like the more recent stuff, Destiny's back. And I really want to see more of that family dynamic going on. But a lot of the relationships and the biggest conflicts are either between family or between found family, like Magneto and Charles, whether or not you ship them, like they have such that strong relationship, that strong bond, and they're arguing over the best way to build something going forward.
Yes.
And I mean, I've got a Magneto made some valid points t-shirt. I know which side I'm on in that debate, but
Magneto wouldn't be interesting if he didn't have points. Like, you know, that's sort of the difference between between Magneto and a lot of other villains, is that like they really make Magneto's point come home, and like the X-Men as a unit are really more between, like they're not exactly one side of the fight. You know, they are in lots of the arguments, but really they're trapped in the middle between humanity and the hardliner mutants, which gives it lots of really interesting story dynamics and lots of angles on which you can take conflicts and things, and it works really well. Yeah.
And when you're like,
they really have a foot in both sides.
Well, exactly. When you're a teenager going through your very goth, angsty, getting bullied for being queer, getting bullied for being a nerd face, the idea of like, let's start our own society. Like, let's just, like, the idea of rejecting like societal hegemonic norms, the idea of being like, why should we conform? That sucks. I don't want to conform just in case that would get me bullied less. I want to have the freedom to be who I am. Like, X-Men does a lot of that assimilation versus, you know, own society that, again, and I know from like listening to other podcasts that Chris Claremont was involved in queer communities. He had like queer friends. He was involved in that, like some of those activism debates. It shows. Because actually how I got into the comics, so it was like first movie, X-Men Evolution, and then the library had all those big black and white omnibuses. So I actually started reading with like, it started with Kitty being introduced.
Yeah.
And so that's how like I got in first, and then read like the Grant Morrison stuff. But there was still that very much that framing of like, from a civil rights standpoint, that mirrors the queer movements and discussions going on at the time. Like assimilation versus our own society versus like, it just was very deep and really spoke to me as someone who's dealing with a lot of like, you know, the rural Iowa in the mid 2000s was a terrible place to be queer. Whether or not I was officially out, like my fellow students pretty much cottoned on. My teachers did, but most of my teachers were also not really interested in doing anything about it, because like, have you tried to be more normal was kind of the response to things. So X-Men, you know, comics from like stuff when my mom was a teenager, still talking about like how being a societal narrative in the face of that, you know, the the George W. Bush era
Yeah.
was a terrible time to be any sort of non-conforming too, because you got all the jingoism in schools.
Yeah.
Rural Iowa got really bad about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as someone who was in the South at the time, I can tell you it wasn't better here.
Oh yeah. No, gosh.
Yeah.
It was really interesting.
One thing that the narrative of X-Men really does is talking about, like, as a metaphor for civil rights and for being different. There's a really good job of pointing out the idea of, well, what if being different was the good thing? Like, what if it was good? Mm-hmm. What if it was just something like it's about you and it literally gives you superpowers, and therefore it removes a lot of the sort of ham-fistedness you see in sometimes when this metaphor is applied in other ways. It's really cool. And also lets them fight giant robots and stuff too.
Yes, but it shows the double-sidedness too. Like, you've got, I joked that, like, Mystique made me realize I was queer. Nightcrawler made me realize I was very bi. Mm-hmm. And, and that second movie was really good with Alan Cumming. But even in the comics,
yeah,
because he represents a lot of the soul of the team, that dichotomy between what is your moral obligation as a person when you're in this kind of society that hates and fears and discriminates against you for who you are, and, like, do you hide or are you proud of who you are? And that radical empathy, that radical, what they do says a lot about them, but what I do in response to this says a lot about me.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was really interesting because, like, especially in the X-Men Evolution, where he is, like, the nerd on the show.
Yeah.
Like, he is, I thought the portrayal of him was really good. Mm-hmm. Like, you do, I guess, that idea of, like, the moral obligation to still choose right and not let it, like, it's easy to become bitter. It's easy to be like, and I mean, I think a lot of people have felt that way, but his radical empathy and still commitment to trying to be who he is authentically and loving him for who he is. I think in X-Men Evolution, they gave him that arc, which I think was great, but it continued on into the comics. Mm-hmm. And it's not a message you tend to see, the idea that, like, you're different and that's awesome, that's to be embraced, but also it's, like, very Pratchett-esque in some ways, the idea that, like, what,
Yeah, the idea that you would be justified in your anger and to turn into a bitter person about it. You've been treated badly enough to do that, but to rise above it nonetheless is, and
without like making yourself a doormat, still to be to be empathetic and it's hard. And I think that, like, I got very into, like, Pratchett, I got very into X-Men, I got really into Diane Duane's Young Wizards, all about the same age. Mm-hmm. And they were just so influential, but a lot of it was just that whole, like, actively radical empathy and kindness, and the idea that, like, the world might suck, and when shitty stuff happens to you, that is terrible, and that is, you should feel hurt. You're justified to feel hurt. Mm-hmm. You're justified to feel angry. But the way you do that is you turn, like Tiffany Aching talks about, like, you turn that kindness into a weapon. You turn that empathy into a weapon. You go, well, that might have happened to me, but I'll be damned if I let it happen to anyone else. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, like, I got into sustainability as a career, partially because of that. I wanted to make the world better for other people. And I do a lot of, like, talking about accessibility with, because I'm celiac, and people with food allergies, with diet-related disabilities get left out of these discussions a lot. I'm the person pointing out, like, we need to consider this in our studies, in our debate about sustainable foods. If we can't just write people off. Yeah. But I think a lot of, like, morally who I am today, I have to say, to an extent, is a lot based on that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's great. So one of the things that can be intimidating with a property like the X-Men is that it is vast and sprawling. Like, there are so many instances of different iterations of these characters. If you want to start reading comics, you've got whatever 40, 50 years worth of comics backlog that you could dive down into. You already talked a little bit about X-Men Evolution. Is that where you would suggest new readers kind of dip in?
I would.
Is there some?
Unfortunately, the omnibuses that I wish I'd gotten copies of those back when they were still, like, available at bookstores. They're not. Mm-hmm. Marvel is releasing omnibuses, but in, like, a different way now. But the fact that Marvel Unlimited has a lot of the back issues is good. But also, I think actually the House of X Powers of 10 reboot, the little soft reboot, is a really good jumping on place. Otherwise, I'd say Grant Morrison's run from like the early 2000s. And because my X-Men, was basically all like the omnibuses the library had, which petered out around like after Inferno and then like Age of Apocalypse and then like then it split off into all the different like titles that they didn't always have. So I kind of jumped, so I kind of got through like Inferno and Age of Apocalypse and jumped straight to Grant Morrison stuff. So I bypassed a lot of the 90s really.
Okay.
And I think Grant Morrison stuff still holds up as a really good entry point. Otherwise, like I said, the House of X Powers of 10, I think does a good job. And then you can go back and realize, well, I like some of this and go back. And they are releasing these omnibuses. I've got the Inferno and the Inferno prologue on my bookcase right in front of me. I think the animated cartoon from the 90s, having gone back and since rewatched it, is a good jumping on point for the characterizations, though I still feel like they need to get Cyclops written better.
He is really rough. Yeah. As someone who has never read the X-Men comics and only ever got him through some other version of the media, it definitely is not one that is... He has not lent himself well to being the fan favorite, as it were.
No, his best, I think, like the comics, especially the bit around Kitty, like the bit with him and like the Dark Phoenix saga, and then him and Madeline Pryor.
Yeah,
I think were some of his really good stuff. And then the idea was to kind of like have him be written out for a little bit, have him kind of like gracefully retire with Madeline, the whole clone and everything, which I do love. I am a huge Madeline Pryor fan, but Annie's nickname is Goblin Queen for that reason. I think, because like, but I think they just suffered from knowing how to write him per se in a lot of ways. But then Grant Morrison did a really good job, his dynamic with Emma. And again, I think recently it just, some characters, you go through awkward bits where people don't know how to write them. And I think because Scott Summers is kind of like awkward nerd in a different flavor, I think X-Men Evolution didn't do too terrible with it, but they also didn't. He was not like one of the really main characters compared to, say, I feel like Kitty and Kurt and Rogue were the main three of that show.
Yeah.
They kind of wrote Jean as a bit of a mean girl. I'm not the biggest Jean fan, so like, whatever. But
yeah,
Jean has gotten some good stuff, but I feel like some characters suffer from people just not knowing what to deal with them or what to do, or
it's real.
And his, unfortunately. But then another reason for the Morrison run, because he's written really well in that his dynamic with Emma, and I love Emma Frost. She is like peak drag, peak, we've got to be fucking fabulous, darling.
Okay.
She is great. She is like very high camp. She is drag in a sense, but like very much
sure.
Like, the idea of turning societal expectations about femininity and wielding it back as a weapon, I think is pretty cool. Yeah. So really, I'd say
awesome.
Either the Powers of House of X Powers of 10 thing, or even just, you could read Grant Morrison stuff and then get into the more recent stuff. But the more recent stuff does have the benefit that it's allowed to be way more gayer. So, I was waiting. I encountered Rachel Summers as a teenager going like, oh, I think there's something going on with her and Kitty. She's very, very butch presentation. Like, sure. I've always leaned more towards the very butch side of things too. It's just like, I really hope she's gay. But now she's got a girlfriend. So like, we've got Mystique and Destiny being able to, their romance has been like was a huge part of actually the Inferno mini event. Like Kate hasn't day-to-day girl yet on screen, but like characters are there because of some of that comics code, because of like changing societal perspectives towards things. They're allowed to be open about characters that were always written as queer, always coded as queer. Yeah, they're able to be a lot more open about it, and it's gone from some of like I liked Young Avengers. The Wiccan and Hulkling thing was cute, but then it's like, oh look, but these are. It was tokenish. It was like they didn't really get to have dynamics outside of like queer stereotypes in some ways, or I mean, I was off and on for Young Avengers, but it felt like for a while I was being held up as like these are the gay characters kind of things, and they didn't.
Sure, yeah.
But now that there's so many more, they're able to tell more different stories.
Yeah. It might have some. I don't know anything about the teams over there, but it might have something to do with. There's definitely a difference between queer characters written by queer creators and queer characters written by straight people, and so it's entirely possible that as more of those people have been brought on as writers, that makes a big difference too. I know it has in other properties for sure.
Well, yeah, and I mean Grant Morrison is queer, so that retroactively. I think that's true because they do have a lot more diverse writing room. They have a lot more queer writers. They've got a lot more, they've got a lot more writers of color. They've got a lot more writers from different backgrounds. I think like Psylocke, who's a character with a bit of a fraught past, per se, about stuff.
Yeah, sure.
She hadn't really even been written by many women, let alone Asian women, until recently.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a strong editorial direction that they've. I mean, I think they've known for a while that like X-Men tends to be the book that attracts the gays.
Yeah.
I also liked it as a teenager because it was the only one that had multiple women on the team. Like there was like DC in those eras was very, even the cartoons were very dudes. There was not really like Batman the animated series did a bit better because we had Harley and Ivy so much, but even so.
There's lots of things. I mean, like I will sing the praises of the Batman animated series from here to the high heavens because it's fantastic. But possibly the best thing that ever did was create Harley Quinn.
Yes.
Who, and then, although they weren't intending to, they created the Harley Ivy ship, and like that's one of the best things to happen to that property in a long time.
Yeah, like before I even really had an idea of like what being gay was, other than Xena and it was like Xena and Gabrielle and Harley and Ivy, like.
Yeah.
It's, but when you looked at the actual like superhero teams being featured, especially like when I was, saving my allowance money for comic books or babysitting money, like DC really was not very much in that space. And even a lot of Marvel wasn't. So X-Men was kind of like.
Yeah. Marvel has it's really weird. Up until very recently, the structure of like, who had what characters was like DC had the top three. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. Those were the biggest names in all of comics. But they had no like B rank people. Like they had nobody that was below, like after those guys, there's this giant gap in popularity before they even got to like freaking Green Lantern.
Yeah, or
right?
the Flash. Yeah, and I like Green Lantern. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. And then Marvel had this like big rank of B-listers with no A-listers, and I'm sure they do have C-listers, but like there was this massive ocean of C-listers on both sides, really. All these like little characters that nobody cared about, where writers could do fun things with them. And that was one of the things about Justice League, the cartoon, like specifically Justice League Unlimited, where they're like, oh yeah, we have this like vast collection of characters that nobody cares what we do with them. So we can just like do kind of interesting, cool stuff. And I think that's actually an advantage for X-Men as well, is because that universe, it's kind of, X-Men is a sort of sub-universe within the Marvel universe as a whole, because they have this massive rank of mutants that they can just bring out if they need to. That gives an opportunity for writers to really, as long, to kind of make their own stamp and to do neat interesting things with their characters beyond where a publishing company would, the comic book company would be like, no, you can't screw with our A-lister who makes us all of our money like that. So they can afford to be less conservative with them, which is really good.
And certainly there's things like Marvel with their A-listers, like I'm sorry, but Storm and Callisto have a thing going on. Storm needs to get a girlfriend. Whether they will let her per se, I don't know. But like, if you look at the comments, like a lot of her strongest relationships have been with women. I've been a Storm and Callisto shipper ever since I first read those comics between them together, and and just like with Wolverine, like again, the closest we got was him being with Hercules in an alternate universe kind of thing. So they introduced Doc and Wolverine's son, who's very bi, but like, I don't think they'd necessarily. I think they'd be worried about backlash if they had Wolverine kissing Cyclops on panel, even though it's been implied. Right. Like, I think that there's still some of the A-listers they won't touch too much to their detriment, but
that's even the I wouldn't even say that at this point in culture, the X-Men themselves, like almost none of them are truly A-listers. Not when you compare them to the Marvel, like the Avenger characters, who are like a rank above them. So they are even more conservative with those guys.
Which is so funny because the only reason the Avengers were there to be promoted was because they were the ones Marvel hadn't sold off the rights to.
Exactly.
So,
they had the advantage of them not being popular, so they were able to use them for the movies, which are, I mean, in many ways, those characters are real departures from their comic book versions.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark has now become the Tony Stark of the comics, but that's not how he was when that character was made that way. And because they were able to make bold choices with them, that allowed them to become popular. It's kind of why DC has totally fucked over their movie stuff over the last 10 years, is because they've got these big names, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, who the only one they were able to do anything good with was when they gave Patty Jenkins Wonder Woman, and then they fucked it up by being like, oh no, it's valuable now, let's get in there and mess with the second movie and totally ruin it.
Legends of Tomorrow, I think, is the best DC TV show, and again, it's all these C-listers that no one cared about.
Okay.
Because it's...
Yeah, no, 100%.
It is...
Look at Arrow. I mean, Green Arrow was only good because nobody cares about Green Arrow. And so,
definition of good, but yeah. I think it started out strong.
I mean, the first couple of seasons, which are the only ones I watched, are fantastic.
But then they screwed themselves over with the Flash TV show, which again, because I think there's too much expectations, and then they got such convoluted... And they made Wally and Iris like adoptive siblings, which turned off a lot of the fan base because that whole like adoptive siblings romance thing. Some people are into, some people really are not. I feel like that was like I'm not as much into the Flash. I had friends who were, but Legends of Tomorrow, it's like, it's like White Canary, it's like Constantine, it's like all these C-listers. But because of that, they're able to make it like really stupid and funny and campy, or the Doom Patrol TV show, which Brendan Fraser is heartbreaking.
Oh yeah, no, I've heard really good things.
Brendan Fraser's, I think, like his best performance as Robot Man in that show.
Yeah, that's been on my to watch list for forever. I only watched the first couple of episodes of Legends of Tomorrow, and at that point, I was a little bit tired of the TV stuff. So I didn't bounce off. But I'm glad to hear that it possibly gets better.
There's like some serious, like they wind up fighting off the evil by possessing like this giant Tickle Me Elmo knockoff kind of thing. Like there's
that kind of
like again because
great.
you're giving everyone the ability to like ham it up, and so like you've got like it says something when John Barrowman is one of the least campy villains on a show.
Oh my God! If he's not the campiest villain, then that is absolutely something.
Let me find the name of the dude. The campiest, Neil McDonough as Damien Dark.
Okay. Oh yeah.
He gets to be so dang campy on that show, and he is clearly having the time of his life.
Yeah. He shows up on Arrow briefly and is terrible on that.
No. He is so good on Legends. There's
well, that character fits, I think, into that universe so much better than he would on to the Arrow side of things.
And
so
like,
that makes sense.
Disaster by John Constantine, like it is. It's basically, he said, it's like these characters that people don't really care about, aren't really emotionally invested. But then you're able to get some really good, like, like TV A-list actors to play them and let them go whole hog. And it ties back to like the Gargoyle stuff, which was like the next gen, a Star Trek TNG reunion show practically, or
basically,
or Leverage, which I'm a huge fan of.
Oh yeah.
And like, so many, like when they show like when Armin Shimmerman shows up for that one random episode. He's clearly, or like Brett Spiner, I think because they're able, as you said, characters no one really cares about that much, they're able to give them more freedom and have more fun. And that's where you get a lot of the emotion and the pathos, but also just the sheer fun. I feel like DC's, for the movies, has lost what it feels to make a fun movie.
Yeah, they don't understand what they have. There's too much money involved, and that means everybody's got to play it really conservative, and it's got to get market tested, and then or you just hand stuff to Zack Snyder, who I think is a terrible. I think he's only accidentally ever made good movies. But anyway,
I would agree. I would agree with you. I think Disney buying Marvel, in some sense, obviously from a media consolidation standpoint, it's got issues. But whoever idea it was to basically saying we're going to have the movies, but we're also going to have the TV shows, and TV shows are where we're getting a little wacky, but that'll lead into the movies. But even with the movies like Ant-Man, right? Yeah. Like that was, I think they've realized that kind of roundedness of the stable.
Yeah.
And again, you said, I agree with you, like not all of them have been good. Captain Marvel in the comics versus the movies is very different. And I'm curious as to how that's going to.
My brain is still broken. I'm so sorry, because every time I'm still the person that when they say Captain Marvel, I think of the person now called Shazam, and I'm still fucking mad about it. But anyway.
No, I know it was.
Talk about a C-lister nobody cared about who has good content.
Though the Shazam movie was fun. I haven't seen the second one. The first one was cute.
Yeah, the first one was really cute. I love that they got. I still think of it being directed by Pony Smasher because he was just like a YouTube guy.
Okay.
Like literally the director of Shazam had like a YouTube channel where he made short horror movies, and he got hired to do a full size movie, and then he got hired to do Shazam. And so he still puts his stuff on YouTube, like the behind the scenes stuff. It's really great. He seems like a real sweetie.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that, but I knew that again, everyone's clearly having a blast. Zachary Levi, who was kind of meh on.
Yeah.
I kind of viewed him as like a slightly B-list Adam Sandler, except less annoying. Mm-hmm. But no, in that movie he's good. But Captain Marvel the problem was that, again, I feel like sometimes with the really heavily powered women, and I'm not the first to make this comparison, lots of people have, the writers don't know how to do that. So they make Wanda crazy. Shout out to Conor Goldsmith, impression there. Right. They don't really know how to handle Jean when she's Phoenix. And they don't really know how to handle Captain Marvel. So they had her partially depowered because of Rogue. But then they kind of tend to be like, well, it's not bad that we're having characters advance these really shitty talking points because we're having a woman do it. Like the time she argued for Minority Report level surveillance-ish. But then... Yeah. But then in the Ms. Marvel comic series, which I was buying as it was coming out, I was spending my babysitting money on buying that and Runaways largely.
Yeah.
Having a Pakistani American protagonist...
Yeah.
Pushing back against all this civil war, this surveillance-ish thing that was very big in popular culture at the time, pointing out it put her in direct conflict with with Captain Marvel, but also kind of showed, wow, we've let the Avengers really become kind of like cops lately.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Big cop energy.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Captain Marvel got a lot of the brunt of that, I think.
Yeah, it's a shame because that character otherwise can be very cool.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it. I don't feel like I've seen a good depiction of her yet.
The movie's as close as it gets, and even then I'm still Monica Rambeau is still my Captain Marvel because the bits of Avengers I did read growing up, she was Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
So nothing against Carol. I know Carol, she's got some good bits, but
yeah. Well, hopefully they'll maybe if they reduce the budget enough, they can make bold choices. They can actually salvage that stuff. Or give her a TV show or something.
Well, I mean, they did have her on WandaVision. Before she got they kind of led into we're having the powers towards the end, and she's going to be in the next one.
Yeah. Monica Rambeau was really cool. Yeah, hopefully they'll pull that stuff out. I have a recommendation for you if it's okay.
Sure.
There is a web comic called Batman Wayne Family Adventures, which concentrates on the best version of Batman I've ever seen, which is Bat Dad.
Yes.
The whole thing is just and this is full of D-rank characters that nobody knows about that this one author has decided, okay, let's make this fun. I think you will enjoy it based off the vibes of this conversation.
Yes. Well, actually, it reminds me of Kitty Unpretty, the Unpretty's Batman fanfic.
Okay.
It's I can link it to you later, but that it's very much a lot of silly, cheesy.
Yeah.
It's fun and it's the leading into the campiness.
That's something that comic properties really need is fun. They can't all be. I will forever have despite as good as they are, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies fucking ruined comics for a while because nobody was allowed, not comic, but comic media.
Yeah.
Because nobody's allowed to be fun.
No.
And
that sucks the joy out of it.
Yeah.
You're not there for there's grim, gritty reality pathos. There's there is stuff that, resonates with people dealing with actual real life shit. But
yeah,
part of the fun is it's the power fantasy. It's who wouldn't be.
And it's goofy.
Yeah.
As much as you love Batman as a serious grimdark, I'm Batman, as long as we love that guy. But also, the dude is dressing up in a furry costume and running around punching dudes because he won't go to therapy.
Yes.
Men will literally spend millions of dollars developing a super suit and punch criminals rather than go to therapy.
And most of his villains are people who just mentally ill people who maybe could have benefited. Or as Poison Ivy, as time has marched on, Poison Ivy is not a villain because the points she's making are entirely correct. They've got her in this anti-hero space. because she was right.
Poison Ivy was right, damn it.
Yeah, like, or the Riddler, like, okay, gay dude could maybe benefit from some, like, Ritalin and a YouTube channel. Yeah. I say this is someone who liked him because it's very relatable. The idea that, like, you know, you're perpetually annoyed by how, you know, especially as a teenager being like, because there were no AP classes really. Yeah. There was not really gifted and talented. My sport was knowledge bowl team.
Getcha.
Which as a teenager is nerdy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, academic decathlon here. As
a teenager, that's kind of like inescapably nerdy. As an adult, again, I've now basically, my supervisor actually mentioned in an email to one of our, like, legal team at work, because we had to talk about something also. Next time you're in town, Holland's a trivia expert. We should go out for trivia night. Like, so.
Lovely.
So at my job now, that is, like, considered, like, people want me on their
it's a benefit.
But, like, the idea of, like, everyone who's around me is an idiot, and I feel stifled, and I want to sort of make them realize how smart I am. Some of those supervillains are a bit of a power fantasy if you're, like, a marginalized, disenfranchised person, not in the idea of, like, a, you know, I want to show them all from, like, a violence way, more of a, like, I kind of want you to realize that I'm smart, or at least have it be valued, or just the, you know, there's so many supervillains with PhDs because they got that fed up with academia and just went like, I
could definitely see how academia would produce people to turn to crime instead. Yeah, I get it.
I mean, I just went up working for the federal government, so not you know, but not supervillain, but less of the cutthroat, very much. Yeah. You know, it's like the joke, like in D&D, a lot of warlocks are just burnt out grad students.
I totally get it.
Like, I'm going all over the place. Sorry, I know, but
no, that's at least 50% of these episodes so far is just like we start off theoretically on a single target, and then it just is everything. Because that's you know, we're on the same wavelength on a lot of stuff. I want to talk about it. Yeah, great.
And I do like I said, I do like Batman. I think Batman has the best rogues gallery. I think it's fun. Like I was in back when like RPBBSs were a thing. I was like in a lot of X-Men ones. That was like my social life as a teenager. X-Men, like message boards discussing stuff, but like doing like X-Men: The Next Generation roleplay kind of thing. But I was also in some Batman ones, and like this is loving mocking, but
we over around here, or at least with me, I fully embrace the idea of like you have to understand something's failures to truly love it. If you think it's perfect and you can't criticize it, then you don't really love it.
If you can't make fun of something you love, then like how deep is your love for it, and how like or how fragile are you? Like
how fragile.
I mean, like I'm Catholic. I'm like very like, you know, I acknowledge that like I like slightly weird. Like I'm a hippie Catholic. You know, I'm very like lefty Catholic, but I will totally roast my own religion, like in the sense or talk about like, you know, like, and I have a friend too, like we agreed, I asked, it's like, can you tell me who the patron saint of workplace drama is? Because I want to know who to pray to tell my coworker to get her head out of her ass. But like, same friend who in a like actual religious writing called John the Baptist a messy bitch who loved drama, which is, but like, that's the thing. If you can't, and when I was going to church in uni, the local Catholic church, there was a nun there who really liked the Life of Brian movie. Like, she thought that was a hoot. So if you can't make fun of something you love from a place of love,
like, exactly.
I don't know. That's just who I am. Like,
no, it's the I don't know what the way is. It's the most robust way to interact with something is because you have to be able to recognize where it falls down, and sometimes you have to love the places where it falls short. And the stupidity of it. You know, anybody who's watched who watches Red Dwarf like knows how dumb that is. But that's all of the fun. Like you have to understand.
Or like the really stupid TNG episodes. Like everyone brings up like that Sub-Rosa like with the ghost sex, and I'm like, okay, but that walked so then Janeway and her like holodeck romance novel episodes could run.
And also so she can go faster than Warp 10 and turn into a slug and have sex with Tom Paris and leave behind some babies. Why didn't they bring back the babies? Like, don't leave them there in the swamp.
It's just like the third X-Men. I will say the most disappointed I've ever been. So the third X-Men movie came out in 2006. I had a car. I had my driver's license because Iowa, you can get your learners at 14. And I got a car at like 15, not because my parents spoiled me, but because then I could run errands for my mom or take my sister to tennis practice or whatever. But I remember feeling so adult because I had enough money to buy the ticket. I could drive myself to the theater. I could go see it on opening day. and I walk out going, what the actual fuck did they do? I'm just going to pretend that movie never happened.
Legit don't remember which one that was.
Good.
Is that...
You're not missing anything. It was the...
that's the one where they're like, let's just do memes? Because they brought in Colossus. I remember.
Well, yeah, and
now.
they had like the weird Phoenix thing, and it was just like really weird. And they had Callisto, a character I like, but then they didn't have her... They gave her Caliban's powers. They had her just working for Magneto. It was just really weird. And like, I have to say this, but like, the only good X-Men movies were the first two.
Okay, sure.
I mean, like, the other ones have some stuff to recommend them, but
yeah,
I'm sorry, First Class was terrible.
Okay.
They like, because they broke a lot of the backstory things. Having like Mystique grow up with, they seem to keep wanting to make Mystique's backstory dependent on Magneto or Charles or somehow, when her whole thing is like, she's older than both of them. In comics, she was Sherlock Holmes. That's how she met her wife.
Sure.
Like, it's been confirmed in the comics. Like, they even had a thing where, like, she as Sherlock Holmes was investigating Jack the Ripper, who turned out to be Mr. Sinister, and was like his first phase. It was brilliant and hilarious. I love it. But like, I think it's that grim darkness and the drama that just kind of infected all the other super movies. Yeah. And they lost some of that.
Yeah. And,
fun.
And the desire to make it not goofy. Yeah. To make it serious, you know, not serious, but like to remove some of the ridiculousness of it. When the ridiculousness is built in, it's like, it's a feature, not a bug, you know?
X-Men Apocalypse was ridiculous, but not in a way they intended. That was like
that sometimes happens.
That was like unintentional camp, like unintentional. Logan actually was pretty good, but it was again very gritty, grim, dark.
Logan, I still, well, I mean, like, I love Logan because it's the sort of I don't know. That's a love letter to the Hugh Jackman Wolverine, right? Like that's what that is.
Yes.
Really. Yeah, which is cool.
Yes, and I did.
I have to say, I even like, but like, if you want unintentional fun, I still think that X-Men Origins Wolverine kind of actually fits.
Okay.
Like, if you go into that movie with the proper expectations, it's fun.
Yeah, I watched that in the theaters on a date.
Yeah.
And that did not bode well for any future dates with that person because I did not.
No.
I was not on my best behavior. I went out basically giving, here's an itemized list of 99 disagreements as to why. But having since rewatched it, it comes around into if you're watching it like with some friends and mocking it, or like then
it's like The Room, right?
Then it's fun. Like that's
it's like high outsider art.
It's like, and I love cheesy campy movies like me and some friends, because you can stream movies over Discord pretty easily.
Yeah.
So me and some friends, we watched all 3 Dungeons and Dragons movies back to back one afternoon, and like the first one is still Jeremy Irons just chewing the scenery for 3 hours. It's great.
Excellent. That's what he should do. Never let him do anything.
The plot is the least coherent, but it's the most fun. The second one's had better plot, but we're less campy. But like, we're just, we've got it going. We're just like, oh, look, how's the CGI has really not aged well here. Or like, that's some of those movies I think would be fun to rewatch like that. Or,
Yeah.
X-Men Origins Wolverine would be good for we watch cheesy movies and mock them kind of afternoon. That might be fun.
Yeah. If you walk in, I watched it originally in the theaters too, and I remember walking in and being like, oh yeah, it's going to be good.
Yeah, same.
And then it wasn't good. But if you walk in going, it's going to be bad and we're going to have fun, then it's fun.
That's what I'm kind of bracing myself. I haven't seen New Mutants yet. I've slightly been put off it because of some of the talk they did about the casting decisions. Like, oh, no one would really want, like, they can't make Bobby DaCosta black because, like, well, no one would buy a black rich kid, or like they decided to make Ilyana randomly racist. So I'm thinking it might have to be for one of those, like, I watch with a friend who will let me pause and go like, or just let me mock it resoundingly.
Well, I do need to bring us in for a landing here because we're coming up on time. But
sure, sorry about that.
No. This is me. That's just me putting the brakes on myself as anything else.
Fair enough.
If the audience wants to find more of you on the internet, where can they find you?
Sure, I'm on Twitter while Twitter's still around at Doc Holland D. Yeah. Like, it's professional stuff. It's nerd stuff. Otherwise, I'm where I post my fanfics between me and God, but
that's fine.
But no, otherwise you
can always just imagine.
It's not like it's not anything like bad or anything. It's just more
No, it's for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's fine.
and, you know,
that's the way it should be.
if you can manage to quote Paulo Freire and Mr. Rogers in the same fanfic and make it work, it made sense in context. But
That's great.
no, but yeah, pretty much on there. Otherwise, I'm on like the Discord a bit.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not like the hugest on social media. I mostly lurk in different
That's
Discords, but
All right.
I will shout out to CSIRO, my employer, who is doing a lot of really cool stuff, and I'm really excited to be part of like their Farms of the Future protein thing.
That's awesome.
I got to meet one of the people who's working on the gluten-free barley thing, so someday I might be able to have a good beer. But they're also doing a lot of really cool stuff in the ag and sustainability space, and
Awesome.
first time I've had a job where I wasn't like the only queer person in the department either, so
Awesome. Sounds great.
they're very, so shout out to my new job. They're all great. And yeah, and otherwise you can find me on Twitter. And thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah.
It was
This was lovely.
really fun.
Yeah, thank you
I've
for
seen
coming
you
on.
pretty much with just like very, very caffeinated. I apologize, but
Yeah. I mean, I drank a whole cold brew while we're doing this,
Oh.
so I had the energy. Well, that's it for another episode of Media That Made Us. Thanks again to Doc Holland for joining me for a lovely conversation about the X-Men. If you want to find her socials, head on over to the description of this episode. If you want to help the podcast out, why don't you recommend us to a friend or write a review on Apple Podcasts or one of those other places? Or you can head on over to patreon.com/cursedknowledge. Throw a couple of bucks our way. I have been your host, Scott Paladin, and this has been a production of the Library of Cursed Knowledge Podcast Network.